Meet the Elofs. 5 years ago, they adopted a man they'd never met, who writes to them from a prison cell in Israel.
My dearest Nick and Mary, I'm very glad to hear from you so soon. About the next parole hearing, I don't know what will happen. We've passed a long time in a very bad, cruel condition. We will see what the US is going to do with Iraq, if they'll go to war.
The man they adopted is Mordecai Vanunu, jailed as a traitor. He spent 11 years in solitary confinement.
He was buried alive. He was shut up in a 6-by-9-foot cell. No windows, so he couldn't see outside. Even when he exercised, there was a canvas around him when he was out walking.
He has spent more time in isolation in a prison in the Western world than any other human being. It was that bad. His condition was that bad. And that's what really moved us to adopt him. How can a country treat a human being that way?
He served in the Israeli army, studied philosophy, and found work at Dimona. This mysterious complex in the Negev desert employed thousands of people, all sworn to secrecy. For years, Israel called it a textile factory, never admitting its true purpose, making plutonium for bombs. Vanunu's dissent over government policies was noted. He was given a warning and decided to leave. But not without the evidence which would change history. Today, his are still the only photographs ever seen of the inside of Israel's nuclear bomb factory.
Nora Ghaith has lived all her 10 years with HIV. She's one of more than 400 children, it's alleged, were deliberately infected with the virus by a Palestinian doctor and his team of Bulgarian nurses. Nora's life now depends on taking a toxic cocktail of antiretroviral drugs. All the children here and their parents believe they were victims of an experiment, an incredible claim, and one that goes against international scientific opinion on the case. But here, they insist that each victim was injected with the same strain of the virus. If it had been accidental, the virus would have mutated from person to person. No one claims to know what organization is behind all this, apart from suggestions of foreign firms desperate to find a cure for HIV. So why choose this Mediterranean city for the so-called medical experiment? Well, the answer you get here is that Libya was under sanctions. With little travel in and out of the country, patients were an untainted sample. And if things go wrong, the eccentric leadership could be blamed.
Activists believe black women are deliberately being given a controversial contraceptive to bring about a drop in the population, a claim the government denies. Thousands of Ethiopians have immigrated to Israel since the 1980s, but their Jewish heritage has been questioned while their social status continues to suffer.
For nearly 4 years, Racheli Mangoli has been running a youth center in one of Israel's poorer communities. 45 Ethiopian families live here, but throughout that entire time, only one Ethiopian baby was born in this neighborhood, and that alarmed Racheli.
Because I smell something no good. I know about the discrimination here. When I'm going with the children, I feel this. Even when I'm going to buy something in the super, one woman said to me, I don't understand how can you are standing near people like this. When they give me money, I'm going and washing my hands.
After some investigation, Racheli discovered many of the Ethiopian women, keen not to get pregnant while setting up life in a new country, had been placed on the controversial contraceptive Depo-Provera, a drug few Israeli women have heard of, let alone use. This woman was first put on it 4 years ago and underwent repeated injections every 3 months. She says it's left her with such terrible pains in her hands and back she can no longer work. She insists she was never told about its side effects or offered an alternative. Like many Ethiopians in Israel, she's afraid she'll be deported if she questions the authorities. Dr. Factor is reluctant to give the contraceptive to his patients. He says it's known to delay fertility for months after women come off it, and in some cases can cause infertility. The number of black babies in Israel is decreasing, but there are no official statistics to back up her claim, although for community workers and Ethiopian women here, they don't need statistics. They feel their reality speaks for itself.
Although slavery still exists in parts of Africa and other parts of the world, the last great trafficking in human slaves occurred in bringing Africans to the New World, beginning in the early 16th century and flourishing up to the middle years of the 19th century. The most egregious, cruel, and murderous aspect of this period was the transatlantic slave trade, often called the Middle Passage. Scholarly studies of the loss of life during the transportation of slaves to the Americas suggest that between 7 and 10 million Africans suffered indescribable cruelty and perished in the Middle Passage. The human suffering and death from the African slave trade is the cornerstone of white guilt both in America and around the world, and has been tirelessly promoted by both academic and popular media. The film Amistad by Steven Spielberg is the cinematic standard of films about the slave trade, and a more recent treatment is the excellent film called Amazing Grace. Amistad carefully portrays the slave trade as a Christian European-American enterprise. It is terribly unflattering portrayals of American leaders, the Queen of Spain, and conspicuously Christian slave traders. It has numerous images of Christian crosses accompanied by scenes of horrific treatment of black slaves. Before Amistad, though, in 1992, the Nation of Islam caused a tremendous controversy when it published the book The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews. It quoted prominent Jewish historians who claim that the African slave trade, and indeed slavery in the West, for the last 2,000 years, was thoroughly dominated by the Jewish community. Now, 15 years before the publication, I appeared on the largest black talk show in America and for the first time exposed the issue before a national audience. As strange as it might seem to some of you, in spite of my politics, I had a role in setting in motion the rising black awareness on this issue. 5 years after The Secret Relationship was published, Amistad was made. I think it was perhaps a remedial effort to put the genie back in the bottle. It was set in a thoroughly Christian New England. The actual center of the American slave trade was at Newport, Rhode Island. It is no minor coincidence that Newport had America's oldest synagogue and was home of the largest thriving Jewish community in the New World. Although Spielberg portrayed the horrific slave trade as thoroughly a Christian affair, here are some words of the major Jewish history of the early Americas called New World Jewry. It's by S.B. Liebman and the American Jewish Historical Society. He wrote about those who owned and manned the ships, the perpetrators of this mass human cruelty and murder. Quote, "They came with ships carrying African blacks to be sold as slaves. The traffic in slaves was a royal monopoly, and the Jews were often appointed as agents for the crown in their sale. They, the Jews, were the largest ship chandlers in the entire Caribbean region, where the shipping business was mainly a Jewish enterprise. The ships were not only owned by Jews, but were manned by Jewish crews and sailed under the command of Jewish captains. Jewish merchants played a major role in the slave trade. In fact, in all the American colonies, whether French, Martinique, British, or Dutch, Jewish merchants frequently dominated. This was no less true on the North American mainland, where during the 18th century Jews participated in the triangular trade that brought slaves from Africa to the West Indies and there exchanged them for molasses, which in turn was taken to New England and converted into rum for sale in Africa. Jewish historians record old Jewish documents showing how the slave trade was so thoroughly Jewish that slave auctions throughout the Americas had to close on Jewish holidays. Brazil received far more African slaves than North America. A. Witzner, another official of the Jewish Historical Society, in his book Jews in Colonial Brazil, pages 72 and 73, wrote, quote, "The buyers who appeared at the auctions were almost always Jews, and because of their lack of competitors, they could buy slaves at low prices. If it happened that the date of such an auction fell on a Jewish holiday, the auction had to be postponed." The actual fact is that even in the South, less than 5% of white people owned slaves. Less than 2% of whites owned slaves in all of pre-Civil War America, while 40% of Jewish householders owned slaves. Now notice how only guilt is ascribed for white people in slavery, even though Jews were 2,000% more likely to own black slaves than was any white Gentile person. When I broached some of these facts on Black Perspectives in the News, the host was fascinated. And the underlying question is why there is a collective white guilt assigned for the slave trade, but no collective Jewish guilt.